Hello. In this video, I am going to read chapters 5 through 9 of Jennifer Bassett's William Shakespeare, Oxford Bookworm's Library. Chapter 5, The Plague Years. Will wrote his play Richard III for Richard Burbage, and it was a great success. Richard III was a wicked king, a murderer. But he was wonderful on the stage, with Burbage's great voice and fine acting. Soon all London was saying King Richard's famous words when his horse is killed in war. A horse, my kingdom for a horse. All kinds of people came to see plays, and Will was making a lot of new friends. One day, after the play, he was talking to a young man outside the Rose. He was a very beautiful young man, a bit like a girl, perhaps, but still very good looking. Later, I asked Will who he was. The Earl of Southampton, Will said. He's only 18, but he loves poetry and plays. Isn't he a friend of the Earl of Essex? I asked. Everybody knew the Earl of Essex. He was young and good-looking, and some people said that Queen Elizabeth was in love with him. I don't know about that. The Queen was 59 years old and a very, very clever woman. But it was true that she liked to have good-looking young men around her, and the Earl of Essex was her favorite. Then. It all changed later, of course. Yes, he is, said Will, but I think Essex is a dangerous man. Henry needs better friends than him. Henry, eh? I said, surprised. My word, do you really call him Henry? Not Lord Southampton? Only when other people aren't there, Will laughed. I'm still just an actor from Stratford, Toby. Not very important. Let's go and have a drink at the Boar's Head on our way home. Will was always like that. Quiet, never shouting about himself to the world. In the Boar's Head, we met some friends and started talking. The talk was all about the plague, which was coming back again into London. Have you heard the latest news? Said one man. They say that more than 30 people are dying every week now. And the city council, said another man, wants to close all the theaters. They always do that when the plague comes to London. There'll be no work for any of us actors. But the players can go on tour, surely, said Will. Yes, said the first man, but it's a hard life. A different town, a different inn, a different play every night. I think I'll stay in London. The plague is terrible in any place, but it was worst in London. In those narrow streets with houses so close together and the dirty water running down the middle of the street, there was no escape. When the plague came, it ran like fire through the town. If someone in a house got the plague, then the doors were shut and locked, and a big red cross was put on the door. Nobody could leave the house. You had to stay inside and fight or die. If you were rich, you left London as fast as you could. In September 1592, the city council closed the theaters. Are we going on tour, Will? I said to him one day. Or back to Stratford? We can't stay in London. You go back to Stratford, Toby, he said slowly. I'm going to Lord Southampton's home in Hampshire for a while. He's asked me to go and stay with him. I can do some writing there. read his books, meet a few people. I looked at him. There's a woman in this somewhere, isn't there? You've had a strange look in your eyes for weeks. Will laughed, but didn't answer my question. The theaters in London didn't open again until June 1594. Will often visited Lord Southampton, but sometimes we went on tour with the company or spent time at home in Stratford. Will began to spend more time in Stratford because it was quiet there and he could do his writing. I never heard what Anne thought about it all. During those years, Will wrote a lot of poetry. He wrote his beautiful long poem, Venus and Adonis, for his friend Lord Southampton. And he wrote many of his famous short poems, the sonnets. But they didn't go in a book. They were only for his friends to read. One day, when we were back in London, I was reading some of his latest sonnets. Will was out somewhere and I was at home in our lodgings in Bishopsgate. A lot of the poems were about a woman, a terrible, black-haired, black-eyed woman. She was cold and cruel, then she was true and loving, and then she was cruel again. For I have sworn thee fair, and thought thee bright, who art as black as hell, as dark as night. Was Will writing about himself here? I asked myself. And who was this woman, this dark lady? I always like to know what's going on, so I listened and watched and looked at all his women friends. Then one day I saw her. I was coming in the door at our lodgings, and she was coming downstairs. She had black hair and great stormy black eyes, and there was gold at her ears and round her neck. I stood back, and she went past me like a ship sailing into war. She looked wild and angry and very, very beautiful. Whew, I said to myself, if that's Will's dark lady, he'll never have a quiet, easy life. The woman looked Italian, so I went and asked John Florio about her. Florio was Lord Southampton's Italian teacher. We saw a lot of him in those days. I described the woman, and he knew her at once. Emilia, he said, Emilia Bassano, now Emilia Lanier, wife to Alfonso Lanier. Before that, she lived with the old Lord Chamberlain. She was not his wife, you understand. But why do you want to know, my friend? If she's a married lady, she doesn't have a lover now, then. Florio laughed loudly. Lovers? You don't know Emilia Lanier. She's a bad woman, my friend, a bad woman. Now we spoke very quietly. For a time, she was the friend of Lord Southampton, but not now. That is all finished. I didn't ask him about Will. Perhaps Emilia Lanier was Will's dark lady, or perhaps Will was just trying to help his friend Lord Southampton. Nobody will ever know now. Chapter 6, Death in the Family. After the plague years, we were busy all the time. There were new companies of players, and Will now belonged to the Lord Chamberlain's men. The Lord Chamberlain was a very important man, close to the Queen, and we often put on plays for the Queen's court and in the houses of the great lords of England. We had some very good actors. There was Will and Richard Burbage, and of course, and John Hemmings. And there was Augustine Phillips, Henry Condell, and Thomas Pope. There were other actors too, but those 6 were the real company. They worked together for more than 20 years and made a lot of money too. I did the costumes and properties for the Chamberlains. John Hemming said I was the best properties man in the city. Will was special because he wrote the plays, and what plays they were. He never wrote the same play twice, like some writers. He was always trying something new, something different, and he wrote fast, too. John Hemmings could never understand that. How can you write so fast, Will? He asked him. And you never make a mistake or change a word. Will didn't really understand it himself. It's all in my head, he said. I think about it, and then it just comes out on paper. He wrote a play about love in 1595, Young Love. It was Romeo and Juliet. It was a very sad play because the young lovers die at the end. But the playgoers loved it. They wanted to see it again and again. Will played the part of old Capulet, Juliet's father. One of the boy actors played the part of Juliet. There were no women actors, so boys played all the women's parts. Of course, Will never put real lovemaking on stage. He did it all with words, clever, beautiful words, and you forgot that the women and girls were really boys in dresses. Some of the boy actors were very good and went on to play men's parts when they were older. We played Romeo and Juliet at Richmond Palace that year. We always played before the Queen at Christmas. She liked to see the new plays, and she paid us £10 a play. We often had to work through the night to get the stage ready in time, but it was exciting to be in one of the Queen's palaces at Christmas. There was a lot of singing and dancing and eating and drinking. Some years, Christmas began in November and didn't finish until February or March. The year 1596 began well, but that summer the weather was really bad. It never stopped raining, and the plague began to come back into London. We were in Stratford for the summer, but I went down to Hampshire for a few weeks to do some business for Will about some sheep. Will didn't need me at home because he was busy writing his new play, A Midsummer Night's Dream. I came back to Stratford one wet August evening. The house in Henley Street was strangely quiet, and I went round the back and up to Will's room, his writing room, we called it. He was just sitting there, not doing anything, just sitting. What's the matter, Will? I said. Where is everybody? At church. His face was gray, and his eyes looked empty, dead. What happened? I asked. What is it? He looked at me. Hamnet, he began. Hamnet was ill last week, and he died yesterday. He was only 11, Toby, and he's dead. My boy, my only son. He's dead, Toby, dead. He put his face in his hands. What can you say to a man when something like that happens to him? I sat down next to him and put my hand on his arm. We sat together silently. I knew that Will loved that boy of his, red-haired, bright as a new penny, full of life, just like his father. After a while, I said, You'll have other sons. Anne's 40 already. Will's voice was tired. She's had no children since the twins. Well, now, you've got two fine girls in Susanna and Judith. They'll marry before long, and you'll have more grandsons than you can count. You'll see. There'll be boys running up and down stairs, shouting for their granddad Will. He smiled sadly, but his eyes were not so empty now. Pleased, I went on quickly. And there are all your brothers, Gilbert, Richard, Edmund. They'll have sons too. The Shakespeare family will never die out. Think of the family, Will. the family. And he did. He was already a famous poet and playwright, but he was a family man too. The next year, 1597, he bought a new house for his family. It was a big, grand house called New Place, right in the middle of Stratford. It cost £60, a lot of money, and the townspeople began to say, Mr. Shakespeare, not young Will the actor or John Shakespeare's boy. They were happy to do business with him and to borrow money from him. Anne was very pleased with the new house. The wife of Mr. Shakespeare of New Place was an important person in Stratford, but she still didn't like Will's work. Actors are wild, dangerous people, she often said to him. I'm not interested in plays or the theater, and I don't want to know anything about your work. But she liked the money and the new house and the new dresses and the 6 fields of apple trees and the big farm north of Stratford that came a few years later. Will never talked much about Hamnet. Life goes on and Will was busier than ever, but I know he thought about his son a lot. His grief was very deep inside him. A year or two later, I was talking to John Hemmings about the costumes for Will's new play, King John. John Hemmings was a family man. He had 14 children in the end. The noise in his house, shouting and laughing, coming and going. John was looking at the playbook. You see this bit here, Toby, he said. Will's writing about his son, isn't he? I read the word slowly and remembered Will's empty eyes that day in August. Grief fills the room up of my absent child, lies in his bed, walks up and down with me, puts on his pretty looks, repeats his words. Richard Burbage said once that Will's writing changed after Hamnet's death. Will still laughed at people in his plays, but he also felt sorry for them. Sorry for all the world, good and bad, rich and poor, young and old. And his people were real. No one was all good or all bad. There was a man called Shylock in his play, The Merchant of Venice. This Shylock was a moneylender and a cruel man. Everyone hated him. But in the end, when Shylock lost everything, you had to feel sorry for him. He was just a sad old man. Perhaps Richard was right. And if anyone understood Will, it was Richard Burbage. Chapter 7, Queens, Kings, and Princes. Every year we took more and more plays to court at Christmas. In 1598, one of Will's plays was Henry IV. A lot of the play was about the king's son and his friend, Sir John Falstaff. Sir John was old, fat, lazy, drank too much, talked too much, laughed too much, but you had to love him. He was a great favorite with the London playgoers, and there were a lot of Falstaff jokes going round at the time. After the play, the Queen wanted to speak to Will. Why? What have we done wrong? John Hemmings said to me in a very quiet voice. We'll find out in a minute, I said. We all watched while Will walked over to the Queen's chair. She was an old woman. She wore a red wig and she had black teeth. But she was still a very great queen. And if the Queen was not pleased, she had a good, strong voice, an actor's voice. We could hear her easily. Mr. Shakespeare, she began. Then she smiled, and suddenly you knew why all Englishmen loved the Queen. It was like the sun coming out on a spring morning. Mr. Shakespeare, you are the best playwright in England. I enjoyed your play, and I thought that Sir John Falstaff was very funny. I have known many Englishmen like him. Will you write me another play? I would like to see Sir John in love. When Will came back to us, his eyes were bright, but he was already thinking about it. "Don't talk to me," he said. "I've got a play to write." He wrote it in 2 weeks, and we took it down the Richmond Palace and played it before the Queen on February the 20th. She laughed and laughed at the Merry Wives of Windsor. She didn't have much to laugh about in 1599. There was a lot of trouble in Ireland, and the Queen sent the Earl of Essex with 20,000 men to fight a war. Lord Southampton, Will's friend, went with him. All London came out onto the streets to watch when Essex and his men left for Ireland. Will wrote an exciting play about war that summer, and he put in a word or two about Ireland. That was Henry V, about a very famous English king who fought a war in France. But Essex was not Henry V. He didn't know how to fight a war, and he ran away back to England later that year. The Queen never spoke to him again. In September, we opened the Globe Theater. It was a brand new building near the Rose. Will, Richard Burbage, and the others paid for it themselves. It was the best playhouse in London, and soon the most famous. The other companies had good theaters and some good actors, but we had the famous Richard Burbage and the best plays. We put on 3 new plays by Will in the next year and some plays by other writers. One of the new playwrights was Ben Jonson. He was a clever man and he wrote clever plays, but people still liked Will's plays best. Ben couldn't understand it. He was always arguing with Will about how to write plays. He argued with everyone. He went to prison once because he killed a man in a fight. He was 8 years younger than Will, but he and Will were very good friends. Will's next play was Hamlet, Prince of Denmark. We all met one day in the Boar's Head to talk about it. There were 6 of us, me and Will, Richard Burbage, Henry Condell, John Hemmings, and Augustine Phillips. Will put his pile of papers on the table and sat down. "Well," he said, "you've all read it. What do you think?" "It's very good," John Hemmings began, "but it's too long. It'll take about 4 hours in the theater." "We don't have to use it all," Will said. "We can cut it down to 3 hours, perhaps 2.5. Henry Condell picked up one of the papers from the table. "Look at this bit, when Ophelia is talking about Hamlet," he said. "Hamlet sounds like the Earl of Essex to me. Were you thinking of Essex when you wrote this?" Will smiled. "Perhaps," he said, "and perhaps not." "Richard will play Prince Hamlet, yes?" said Augustine. "Of course," Will said. "I wrote the part for him. He's our star actor. I'll play the ghost of Hamlet's father." He looked at me. "Hamlet will wear black, Toby, and Ophelia will wear white." Henry finished his beer. "It's a good story, Will, with good parts for us all. But will the playgoers like it? It moves very slowly, and they like a play to be fast and exciting. Prince Hamlet knows that his uncle Claudius murdered the king, his father, but he doesn't do anything about it for a long time. He just talks about it, and in the end, nearly everybody dies one way or another." Augustine didn't agree with that. "You haven't understood the play, Henry. It is exciting, very exciting. The play is inside Hamlet himself. He wants to kill his uncle, but he can't. Murder is wrong, but he must kill him because of his father. We can all understand how he feels." All this time, Richard Burbage was silent. He was reading bits of the play again. Now he put down the paper in his hand and looked up. His eyes were bright, excited. "Have any of you really listened to the language of this play? This is your best play yet, Will. The best of them all. Just listen to the language, the poetry." He stood up, and his great voice filled the room. "To be or not to be? That is the question." We sat and listened, silently, while that wonderful voice brought the words to life. Will watched him smiling. He knew that Richard, like him, was in love with words. To die, to sleep, perchance to dream. Aye, there's the rub. For in that sleep of death, what dreams may come, when we have shuffled off this mortal coil, must give us pause. Richard Burbage was right, of course. The people loved the play. They loved Burbage's Hamlet. They cried for poor Ophelia's death, and they shouted for the murderer Claudius to die. I think it was Will's most famous play. Chapter 8, A Scottish King for England. Will's father died in 1601. In his last years, John Shakespeare was a happy man. His son was famous, and the Shakespeare family was important again in Stratford. But there weren't many children in the family. Will's sister Joan was married and had a little boy, but Will's brothers didn't have any children. Susanna, Will's older daughter, was now 18, and Will said to her one day, "We must find you a husband soon, Susanna." But Susanna shook her head. "Oh, I don't want to be married, Father, thank you." We all smiled at that, because there was already a young man who was often a visitor at New Place. That was John Hall, a clever young doctor. Will liked him. Back in London, the theaters were always full, and actors were now important people in the city. Will and I were now living in the very fine lodgings in Silver Street. Will and I were now living in very fine lodgings in Silver Street with the Mountjoy family. The Globe and the Lord Chamberlain's men were doing very well, and the older actors in the company were making money and buying houses and land. But some people still thought that actors were dangerous, wicked people. Then Queen Elizabeth died on the 24th of March, 1603, at Richmond. I remember the day well. The theaters were closed. You can't have plays when a queen is dying. And we were all at Henry Condell's house. He and John Hemmings lived very near our lodgings in Cripplegate. We were all very worried. The new King of England was James I. He was already King of Scotland, and he had a young wife, Queen Anne of Denmark, and 3 young children. But what was he like? Would he be a good king? And most importantly, did he like plays? If King James doesn't like plays, said Henry Condell, we're finished. There are already a lot of Puritans on the London City Council, and they'd love to close the theaters down. Henry always looked at the black side of everything. Well, he's written a lot of books himself, said Will. Perhaps he'll be interested in plays too. We'll just have to wait and see. We didn't have to wait long. On the 19th of May, I was underneath the stage in the Globe. I was trying to mend a broken door in the floor of the stage. We used this door when a ghost came on or went off in a cloud of smoke. Suddenly, I heard feet running across the stage. I looked up through the hole and saw Will and John Hemmings and Richard Burbage. They were all very excited. Listen to this, Toby, said Will. He was holding a piece of paper in his hand. It's a letter from King James. From today, we are the king's men. We're working for the king himself, and he wants to see all the plays. We're going to have new red coats to wear when we go to court, Richard said. And, John said, he's going to pay us £20 for every play at court. What do you think about that, Toby? We were all laughing and smiling now. Well, John, I said, if we're so rich, can I have a new door? I can't mend this one again. It's too old. That summer, the play came back. By July, 1,000 people were dying every week in London. One of them was the little son of Will's friend, Ben Jonson. By the end of the year, there were 33,000 dead in England. The theaters closed, and the King's Men went on tour. Will and I spent the summer at Stratford. When Christmas came, the King's Men put on a lot of plays at court. The king was at Hampton Court Palace that year, which was outside London, well away from the plague. I couldn't go because I fell off my horse one day and broke my leg. Stupid thing to do. I had to stay home. I had to stay at home. But Will told me all about it when he came back. The new king and queen like to enjoy themselves, Toby, he said. They're a happy family. Prince Henry, who's 9, is a very nice little boy, and his sister Elizabeth is beautiful. Little Prince Charles is only 2. He was silent for a minute. Perhaps he was thinking about Hamnet. Then he went on. Queen Anne likes plays very much. She likes music and dancing too. She showed her legs in one dance. My word, I said, things like that never happened at court in Queen Elizabeth's days. We live in different times, Toby. A lot of things are going to change. But change only comes slowly. The king's men went from one success to another. At the king's court at Christmas 1604, there were 22 plays, and 8 of them were wills. In 1605, there were 13 plays at court, and 10 of them were wills. We always did the plays at the Globe first, before we took them to court. Will was writing more slowly now, but during these years he wrote some of his best plays, Othello, Macbeth, and King Lear. That was a sad, dark play. When King Lear carried his dead daughter Cordelia onto the stage, well, every man, woman, and child in the globe was crying. It's true. Richard Burbage played Lear, of course. What an actor he was.